A very good morning to all. On behalf of the principal, Professor Anita Kaushal, the faculty and the students of the Department of English, I welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Meenakshi Shivram, from the Department of English and Cultural Studies, Christ University, Bangalore. Unfortunately, due to some reasons, the principal will not be able to join us today. I also take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all the participants, students, and faculty members across institutions who have joined the webinar. The Department of English, one of the foundational departments of the college, inaugurated in 1956, runs General English, Functional English, Elective English, and BA Honours courses at the undergraduate level. In addition to a very well-established postgraduate department, the faculty has been successfully guiding PhD research scholars in an autonomous research center instituted in 2018 under the aegis of the Department of English and Cultural Studies, Punjab University, Chandigarh. Keeping in mind the academic requirements of the students and the need for expansion of their critical horizons, we started a lecture series titled Emerging Critical Perspectives. This is to gauge and to map the developments taking place in the literary and cultural space. Today's lecture, second in the series, will be delivered by Dr. Meenakshi, who is a polymath with diverse interests, who has energetically worked towards remarkable contributions in prestigious institutions, and who is also very popular with her students. Today's talk, in fact, is a testimony to how students can be bridges between teachers, between departments, between institutions, and to the sharing of ideas at large. Case in point, one of our students is now learning at Christ University, and she's been very helpful in connecting the communities of the college. I will now perform my delightful duty of introducing the dynamic speaker who will be sharing with us some key moments in the genealogy of literary criticism. Dr. Meenakshi Shivram, who now teaches at Christ University, has earlier taught at postgraduate courses at Mumbai University, SNDT Women's University, and Chennai University. He has co-edited a book titled Post-Coloniality, Reading Literature. Her book titled Functional Stylistics was on the recommended list for students of Mumbai University. She has reviewed literature-related books, newspapers, and journals. He has contributed entries to the Indian Poet, the Rooted Encyclopedia of Post-Colonial Literature. Her interests she has a lot of interest in fiction and philosophy as well, and in particular in Indian Bhakti poetry. Interestingly, she is also a trained executive coach and works with organizations like Asian Needs and Volkswagen. She is a translator from Hindi to English and has won the Sahitya Academy Award for one of her translations. We are truly honored to have you address the webinar today, Dr. Meenakshi. Before I invite Dr. Meenakshi to share her ideas and critical insights with us, just a word on how the webinar will unfold. After Dr. Meenakshi's talk, my colleague Gurdaman, assisted by our student Krishtala, will coordinate the Q&A session. Later, Dr. Tanuja Pathak will deliver the concluding remark to end the webinar. I now invite Dr. Meenakshi to begin her talk.
Thank you, Dr. Maninder. Am I audible? That's always the first question.
Yes, very much so. Yes, very much so.
Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to thank my student Sehaj, who has put us together. And as you rightly mentioned, brought the community together. A lot of people were wondering, what is someone from the south of India doing, speaking to students from the north of India? I'm glad that this has been made possible. Um, so, greetings to the 100 people who have registered here. And I'm sure there are others on YouTube as well. Thank you for inviting me once again, Dr. Maninder. I'd like to begin my talk. This is the second, like you mentioned, in a series that is looking at critical perspectives within the departments of English and what we are doing about that. So my talk is split into 4 parts. The fourth part is the key part, which would be my takeaway from what I have learned over the years. The first part is a reality check. What is it that we are doing in our classrooms, right? What is it that in the name of literary criticism, what comprises the syllabus for that particular paper? The second part will be on my take on the key philosophers who have fashioned and designed the particular movements in literary theory. The third part, very briefly, will be the new theoretical approaches. And then the fourth part is the key part on where do we go with all this information that we have. So I'll begin with the first part, which is what are we doing in our classrooms? All of us who are teaching literature, English literature, have a paper called Literary Theory. And usually, mostly, the syllabus begins with Plato. And with the Socratic dialogue and Plato as representing the Socratic voice, the first question being, what is the relevance of art when ideals aspire? So the big goal for Socrates was truth. There is a truth, there is an essence. Can literature reach that essence? His answer, of course, was no, because we are dealing with the material world. And as long as we are dealing with existence, we cannot reach the essence. Now, that conversation, that discussion was deflected slightly by Aristotle, who talks about the effect of literature. So he does say that the only way to reach the essence is through the existence, but then his focus is on what is the impact of literature. So we enter into another stream, another way of looking at literature as the impact of literature. What is literature supposed to do? Not should it be there or no, but let's assume it is going to be there, and what is it supposed to do? Of course, for Aristotle, it was literature and art has a cathartic effect. Great literature and great art have that effect. And from then onwards, we keep moving for several centuries on to the effect of literature, the purpose of literature, that art must delight and instruct, it must teach and it must entertain. And then we move several centuries forward till we come to Sir Philip Sidney, who talks about bodies of knowledge, history and philosophy, and shows to us how literature is better and greater than history and philosophy. Pretty much this is how our syllabus moves. Then we have questions by Samuel Johnson on should we look at the particular or should we look at the universal? We have a response by Wordsworth who says that, my particular response to my situation in my particular language is what constitutes my response to literature and my response to the world. And then you have T.S. Eliot saying, how can an individual claim to be the repository of all knowledge, right? That we must transcend the individual and take away the individual personality completely. So 2000 years of literary criticism is this very smooth flowing, linear, trouble-free, well-ordered exchange of ideas. Someone says this, somebody else says that, and then somebody responds, somebody has another view, and so smooth that history is. And suddenly, as we come into the 20th century, everything looks very chaotic. We are told there is structuralism, there is post-structuralism. We are not bothered about interpretation. We are looking at, is there meaning at all? Where is the meaning? And so many theories that come out of that, right? Is there meaning in the text? Then we are told, go to formalism. Is there meaning in the reader? Go to reader response theory. Is meaning gender-based? Go to feminism and masculinities and all gender theories. Is meaning location based? Go to post colonialism. Is there an author? Is there a reader? Is there a text? And finally, is there meaning at all? So by the time we come to the 1960s, we are going back to Aristotle. Is there meaning? Where is the meaning? Is there the truth? Can we reach it? Because we are telling, we follow Derrida when he says that as long as you are with language, you cannot reach reality. I think Socrates said that in his own different ways. So that is where we are now. Most universities have this as their syllabus, right? You begin with Socrates and you go on right up to Derrida. And even post-Derrida, we've entered into cultural studies now. So that's like part one, reality check. This is what we are doing in our universities. Now, my take on who are those key philosophers who have fashioned this particular direction in which our syllabus has been designed, right? How do we choose these thinkers? So first is, of course, my big thinker is Socrates. He did ask questions about, are poets liars? I think that's such a beautiful question, especially when you are looking at a word like fiction. How much of the truth do we know? All these artists who make movies, people who write books on the mind of a terrorist, how do they know what a terrorist thinks or what the mind of a terrorist is like? How can you disassociate your own personality from the text? And if all you know is a limited bit of information, how can you claim to know so much more? So these are foundational questions that have been raised and debated. Today, of course, we celebrate fiction, but the philosophical question was on truth. What is truth? Why is the quest for truth so important? Right? And who is to decide? This is the truth. Now, that same argument has led today to questions about truth, beauty, and aesthetics. It has also led to an entire new discipline within a literary criticism on cultural studies. Whose truth gets foregrounded? Who is to decide? And is there a truth at all? So to me, he is a foundational thinker. We have not been able to dislodge his ideas. The second game changer for me is Karl Marx, definitely, because Karl Marx's question was about inequality. He is looking at class, he is looking at his own backyard, but he is raising larger questions of the history of mankind, where in this entire history of the human race, how is it that only 2% of the people have been rich and powerful, and the 98% of the human race has always been ruled by this minority? So it's not a question really about capitalism and a critique of capitalism, though perhaps that is how we may teach Karl Marx in a classroom, but it is a philosophical question, right? One, about inequality and the presence of inequality, and two, about the repeatability of inequality, which Judith Butler might use as performativity. But these are all writers and thinkers who come under my club of Marxist thinkers, all those who question inequality, right? Inequality of class, caste, gender, race, all of that, false consciousness, ideology. So almost all thinkers that we look at in a classroom, say Freud, Lacan, Foucault, Butler, Simone de Beauvoir, all questions about identity, politics, location, subjectivity, again, false consciousness, all these we are talking about because, let's say, Marx initiated that dialogue, the first dialogue. We're not able to dislodge Marx because we're still talking about the possibility of an equal society. So that is another key thinker. And my third and final set of key thinkers are two thinkers, Saussure and Derrida. I'm clubbing them together. So these are 20th century philosopher thinkers, and amazing contribution to the idea of literary philosophy, coming from their own different disciplines. So Saussure's question was about the arbitrary connection between word and reality or the object. So if there is a language, and if we think language reflects reality. Saussure was not talking about all of that. He was only talking about language. And he said that the objects in the world and the word that represents that object, the connection between the two is arbitrary. That is all that, very simplistically put, is the simple thing that he was saying, that we don't know why we call a cat a cat. It could have been called anything else. In different languages, it is called by different names, but really there is no connection between this word that we utter and the object that it represents. All right, simple idea. And look at what it has done to literature, because the whole body of literature deals with words. And our entire world is constructed of words. And what are we to make of what Saussure said? No connection to reality at all. It is an arbitrary connection between this world and that reality. This whole argument is extended by Derrida. Right? Derrida philosophically takes this discussion forward, and he says that there is no reality. So he's saying there are only words. From one word to another word to another word, and the example of going to a dictionary to locate the meaning of a word, it takes you to other words and other words, that there is really no connection between this word and that reality. So like I said, these are thinkers who we have not been able to dislodge. Are we caught in that logocentric world? Is this where we are? So this is the second point about key thinkers. I have named 4. I'm bunching all of them together, right? There are so many key thinkers that I have mentioned, like a Foucault, Roland Barthes, all of them. I've clubbed them together under Marxist kinds of thinkers. But this has been the trend, right? These 3 sets of thinkers they dominate our discourse on critical theory. We are not able to escape them at all. So what are we doing now? Now that cultural studies also is pretty established in English literature departments, many of our departments are doing cultural studies. What is the newer area that has come about? I also like this fascination with what is new, Whereas in philosophy, the question is there is nothing new, right? Our questions are always the same old questions that we ask. The first question, is there truth? If there is a truth, how do we approach truth? That is the question we are asking today, but we are looking at it from so many different lenses. So theoretical approaches, popular now in academic circles, definitely cultural studies. A lot of students are doing their research on cultural studies. They find it more valuable than connecting to literary texts. A lot of students love movies and music, look at festivals, they look at city spaces, they look at architecture. They like that kind of an interdisciplinary approach. The literary text they find limiting. The world of the word, they don't find very interesting. I mean, a small group is like that finds cultural studies extremely important. So there is cultural studies. There is also, very popular now is trauma theory. Several departments are looking at trauma theory. There are departments that are also looking at memory studies. Several departments have included that or are definitely discussing it. They have seminars on it. So these are 3 almost established newer disciplines. Emerging studies, so many, right? For instance, disability studies. Sorry, I also forgot to mention eco-criticism. Eco-criticism is very popular, and that is also included in many syllabi. But newer studies would be disability studies, digital humanities, something called presentism, historical formalism, hysterical realism, a lot of intersectionality theories, and a lot of interdisciplinary theories. So we have all of these newer theories. Interdisciplinary is really literature and health, for instance, literature and the law, newer kinds of words for these kinds of studies. So the text that we follow to have arrived at all of this most often is the Norton Anthology of Literary Theory and Criticism. And in the introduction over there, picked up also from M.H. Abrams, is this concept of what are we discussing when we are talking about literary theory. So what are we talking is that 4 variants to this.
Camera.
There is a text. Oh, before that, there is an author.
123
there is a
people
text.
on YouTube.
There is the reader, and before all that, there is the world. So I don't know which one comes before, right? So there is the world, then there is the author, then there is the text, and then there is the reader. These are the 4 variants in this study. And sometimes the text is very important. Sometimes the writer is very important. Sometimes the reader is very important. Sometimes the context, the world is very important. But all these 4, there's a struggle between these 4 at different periods of time. And that is what we cover in our study of literary theory. So even if we are looking at newer disciplines that have come about, to my mind right now, I'm now going to express my very personal views on this, is that barring cultural studies for the moment, many of these newer theories, trauma theory, for instance, or memory studies, they have an intellectual grounding, but they do not have any philosophical moorings, which is not a disability in any sense, but this is my interpretation of what I see in front of me, that these are limited, self-defeating theories. They will keep you intellectually very stimulated, but after a certain point, you will reach a dead end, like one did with stylistics, right? Or even with translation studies, the theory of translation studies. All that has to be said about translation studies has been said. What is the newer thing that you can add to it? What more can you say about it? That doesn't make it irrelevant, right? But that just makes it that much limited. It's not going to open up into a newer discourse and a newer discipline unless we get that great thinker to open up the possibilities for us. So what about these newer theories that we have? I think only the future can tell us how these theories will develop. So trauma theory and memory studies for me are pretty interlinked. The jargon that they use is also similar. Collective memory, collective trauma, individual memory, individual trauma. You identify something as a trauma. What do you do beyond that? You go to the psychology of that traumatized event or the traumatized person. What do you do after that? What do? You look at the language of the person, of the event, of how it has been represented. You look at the cure for the trauma. In my vision, this is pretty much the area within which memory studies, trauma studies can go. They've jumped out of psychoanalytical criticism, and they will remain over there, and they will have a lot of worth. But I am not able to see the philosophical moorings of these newer disciplines. But I'd like my students to, whoever is listening over here, and the faculty to arrive at their own conclusions, right? Intersectional studies, intersectionalities are new, definitely. A lot of people are interested in looking at discourses, discursive practices, and not sticking to one particular epistemology. But will they lead to infinite possibilities of understanding and interpreting the world, or of changing the world? I'm not so sure. Barring cultural studies, right? So cultural studies is important. It is looking at representation. And my little problem with cultural studies is the same Socratic problem, that it focuses on the representation and forgets reality. A lot of our students who are studying movies and music and space and land and architecture and air and environment, all of that religion under the landscape of cultural studies, are looking at how these have been represented, either in rituals or in practices, social practices. So the study is of the representation of these events. The reality is a little forgotten. there's a disconnect as of now. So if that connect happens, it started with the reality, right? It started with real life situation. I'm sure people like Stuart Hall will be wondering what's happened to cultural studies. This is not what we meant by cultural studies. The way it is proliferating, the way it is replicating itself. But that happens with newer theories when there is a lot of energy that is pushed into one particular area. And all of us are now interested in that newer theory. What is the newer thing? What can I do with it? It's almost like an industry where we are pumping out newer ways of looking at the world. And there is that excitement about disability studies. So I am going to prescribe this particular story where there is a blind person. I will prescribe that story in which someone is lame or someone has a hunchback, and then I will study disability studies. It's fun, but there is no deep underlying significance for it beyond the joy of interpretation. That is my take. And I've been told to speak for half an hour, so I'm going to limit the remaining part of my talk to what I think is important now is, what young people say, what is in it for me? Okay, Plato said what he said, Socrates said, and Derrida said what they said. What do we do with all this information? What is the way ahead for us? Okay, so the way ahead, the way I see it, and the way I would like to see this particular paper move within our syllabi is to go back to a theory that we have not explored fully yet. And that theory is post-colonialism. I think somewhere we have forgotten the impact of post-colonial studies. We have not explored it completely. We began with unearthing our own writers. Most of them were canonical writers, but that's okay. But a lot of translations and making them available into English is a process that is still going on, which is good, which is one aspect of post-colonial studies, but there is so much more. So I know that almost all universities in India do have a paper on Indian literature. They have a paper on Indian literatures and translation. They may not have a paper on Indian theorists because we don't know who they are. We might know of some aesthetics that was available in what we call ancient Vedic, Hindu, India, whatever, somewhere in the past, and some grammarian in the past, someone who wrote in Sanskrit and someone who's talking about. So, some vague idea of some of these scholars. And occasionally, they may appear in one paper on literary criticism, largely to do with aesthetics, almost as if India only looked at aesthetics in the past, and that we never looked at politics or at culture or at society or at people or anything that Western European thinkers are looking at. So my take is that on the one hand, we do a paper called Post-Colonial Studies, and on the other hand, we have a literary theory paper that is so European, that is so completely Euro-American, that has all its theories straight from Columbia University. So why do a paper on post-colonialism if we are not going to foreground that paper? And if we are not going to take that particular position more seriously? What are the things that we are missing out over here? For instance, when Europe at one particular period of its history wanted to go back to its ancient literature, to Greek and Roman literature, we study it as a high point in European life. It was their Renaissance, right? It was a watershed moment for European art, for European history, for European life, society, everything. In India, if today we talk about going back to the past, going back to something in the past and uncovering or recovering knowledge, we see it as regressive. Where is this dichotomy coming from? Where is this ambivalence and ambiguity coming from? Why is it that as an Indian thinker, we are discouraging people from going to the past, thinkers, to the ancient wisdom literature that we already have, and keeping that as a background against which to look at modern writers or modern society? Again, for instance, when we teach a Milton's Paradise Lost, or Spencer's Fairy Queen, most of these books have also become obsolete. No one is interested in even teaching that anymore. I'm sure you know that my most favorite Chaucer is being thrown out of syllabi in the West. I mean, we are, to me, that is not a good thing to do at all. Such great writers that we have to value. But I'm looking at some of the points, right? When we teach a Milton, and apart from the aesthetics of the Fairy Queen and Paradise Lost, we are looking at Milton's combination of religion and politics. The very thing that we want to discourage in our society today. You know what we applaud over there? Wow, look at Milton, how he's brought these two forces together, are the very things we don't want in our own society. Where is this ambiguity coming from? How do we balance this out? Saying something in the class and doing something outside. Telling our students that here is a paper on post-colonialism and we are going to read Edward Said, or a few Indian thinkers also who are pushed in over there, most of them writing from other places, about other places. Where is the truth about our quest, our post-colonial quest? Okay. And I think that what we must do in our literary theory papers is connect three things. Connect literature with history, connect literature to philosophy, and connect literature to political identities. The starting point is literature. And from there, move on. I'm going to explain this a little more. Literature and political identities, we are pretty much over there, right? We are looking at literature, literary texts that lead to the discussion of the topic of identity, say the Dalit identity, the Adivasi identity, the minority identity, subaltern identities. We are looking at that. We are looking at texts and we are going. So the politics is very much there. And that was the title of my paper. The moral purpose. Is there morality at all? Can we talk about morality in a post-structural world? Why are we not raising these questions? Why are we taking the answers that have been fed to us without critiquing them? Perhaps there is critique, but why are we not foregrounding it? Why are we not bringing it into our classrooms? So let me take an example for literature and philosophy, right? When we are looking at literature and philosophy, many of our ancient thinkers never put their names to the text. So we really don't know who the authors of the Vedas were. They never put it. How do we go to a literature classroom and tell our students, the author is dead, the death of the author, Foucault said this, Barthes said this. Sorry, I'm just getting carried away, but I have to mention this about Lacan talking about the self, the mirror stage. Many of our students know about it, that what the child sees in the mirror is not the self. It is a misrecognition of the self. How different is that from Advaita philosophy? That the self is only an illusion. We can never know the self. As long as we are in language, we cannot know it. And therefore, the only way to reach the self is through silence. Where is this going to be integrated? In our literary theory classrooms in India. The last point is about literature and history. What do we do with literature and history? To us, that history is not dependable at all. And that we have to keep trying to make it real. That history, on which a lot of our discussions and debates as post-colonial subjects depend on, is manufactured. How can we go to the real history? But we can attempt it. We can put multiple of these documents together and arrive at it. And therefore, we have to look at literature and caste. And I am going to recommend this book. I don't know if you've heard of this writer, S.L. Bhairappa. And the novel is called Avarana. Avarana means the veil. It is again a Sanskrit word, but the picture is that of a woman wearing a veil, the burqa, the veil or whatever. But this is about the veil that separates knowledge from ignorance. how can we get knowledge, right? What is that veil that keeps us ignorant? That is the way in which avarana is used. Now, this book is talking about rewriting history. How do we approach it before we even think of prescribing it, right? How do we respond to a book like this? This book is talking to us about, can't interpret the book here for you, but the writer is saying, the writer, I think, is struggling to tell us a new history must be written. But how can the writer do that? Because if the writer writes to a newspaper, they are not going to publish it. If he writes it to a journal, they are not going to publish it. So this big, great writer from Karnataka, he puts it into a story. Then he can get it published. If it is fiction, then it can get published. And he wants, through fiction, he's actually given a bibliography. In his fiction, there is a character who is studying history. And then so cleverly, he makes her go to the library and pick up books and gives you a bibliography. She read this book and she read that book and she read the third book. And, so, if you read those books, you will get another history. Are we going to look at literary theory like that? Are we going to connect the dots that we have missed in post-colonial studies? Is the direction that I would like Indian literature departments to focus on. This is my take completely, that if we are introducing our students to post-colonial studies, we are not leading them the full way ahead. So the way ahead for me is to look into the past, right? To go into the past. And I will conclude my talk by sharing with you two sets of anecdotes which have shaped pretty much this paper, right, and the focus of this paper. The first set of episodes is when I was a student in the beginning of the 1980s. For the first time, one paper on Indian poetry in English was introduced. I think I was the first batch of the Bombay University student to get to study about Nissim Ezekiel and R. Parthasarathi and some poets. Just one little bit, right? Indian poetry in English. I think that was the only thing that was introduced at that time. We were 8 students in class, BA students, and we troubled that teacher endlessly. We did not like the poets. We did not like this poetry. We had not signed up to study Indian poetry, right? We wanted to do English literature. And the teacher who taught us that paper was a very young professor and an Indian poet. He was 26. He, unfortunately, no more. He died very young. But, we troubled him. He took us to Jejuri and he said, I'll show you what Arun Kolatkar has written about. We said, what rubbish, this is all not to do anything. This has nothing to do with Indian literature. Ironic, of course, that 10 years later, my own research was on Indian literature. But another 10 years later, so that is 20 years after my being a student, when I was in Chennai, in one of the colleges, I don't know whether it is Queen Mary's or Stella Maris, because it was a girls' college, the girls were all up in arms in a debate saying, we don't identify with Emma. We don't identify with British heroines. Give us our stories. So it took 20 years for that idea to change. But my critical question is, do we make our students think the way in which we want them to think? In 20 years, an entire generation of students said, we don't want Emma. We don't know daffodils. That is not our flower. I mean, that is not the purpose, right? Why can you not know daffodils? Why can you not know Emma? So I was a little shocked that we had created a group of students who are saying we can't identify. So we contributed to that. That's one set of the anecdote. And the second set is very recently, 2 years ago, for an MA paper at Christ University on Indian Literatures and Translation, we had 2 texts. Anand Mat and Hazar Chaurshir Ki Maa. Mother of 1084. Both of them are Bengal based. Students read the book as a Hindutva book. They said the sadhus are rebelling. It is an anti-Muslim book. It is a pro-Hindu book, and that it is not right. Okay, that was one. Then when we did Hazar Chaursi Ki Maa, that's a story about an Naxal rebel, young boy from an upper class family who is joining with these poor people who have been oppressed by the state, and he attacks policemen. Right, he helps the Naxals defend themselves by going against the state. And my students were all pro-Naxal. Not pro-Naxal in the sense of pro-violence, but saying that what can an oppressed citizen do? That the state itself is an oppressor, and therefore it was right for the young people to sympathize and empathize with the Naxals. So when I brought the two texts together in class, I said, when an oppressed group of people are against the king, you don't like it. But when an oppressed group of people go against the state, you're all for it. So where are you? What is your take on oppression, on societal power, on groups of people and forms of protest? I thought it made some students think, and that is why I'm sharing this with you over here, that when we do literature and history, there is the reality of the event, there is the colonized version of history. When we are doing something like caste, for instance, there is the colonial conception of caste, there is the reality of caste. In our classrooms, we just make it into an Ambedkar-Gandhi dialogue. Ambedkar-Gandhi debate, sorry. We just put up these two figures and we say Ambedkar versus Gandhi. Was there nothing available? So there is one particular school of criticism, European school of criticism called New Historicism. I would go to that school of criticism. I would fix that school of criticism. I would encourage my students to take up these books, right? All kinds of books. So whether it is the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, or it is the Inheritance of Lost, read these books and look at newspaper dialogues about these books. Look at television portrayals about it. Connect that history with the history over here and go ahead and figure out what India means to you. So that, I think, would be the purpose of a literary theory paper. I'm going to stop over here. Thank you very much for your time. Did I exceed my time? Could I stick to 40 minutes? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meenakshi. Now I ask Gurdaman to coordinate the Q&A session.
Good morning, Professor Shivram. Thank you so much for speaking out on so many issues. And because, we have limited time, so we'll be taking up a few questions, one which are relevant. And I would request the faculty to directly put the questions to our speaker. So in case if faculty wants to put a question, he or she can do it directly. And that's
Yeah, Gurdaman ji, may I ask a question?